Towards the end of last year, Twitter fired a lot of people across the board. And that trend kind of continued on in the beginning of 2023 as well. A lot of tech companies and big tech companies started firing people. But it can't be for no reason, especially layoffs. It brings in a lot of negative publicity, and no company would want that. But if they're still doing it, there must be a solid reason behind it. This episode is dedicated to finding that reason. Hello, and a very warm welcome to the podcast Secrets of Storytellers. Our guest today is Arjun Prakash, who's the founder at Pivot. Pivot helps you land your dream role or change your career. I think the name is so on point, Pivot. Well, we're going to discuss with Arjun a whole series about how the layoffs have been happening, why are they happening, and if you've been laid off, what should you do? So let's start a discussion and welcome Arjun. Hi Arjun, welcome to Secrets of Storytellers. How are you?
Thanks, Shivam. Excited to be here. I'm doing well.
There's been a wave of layoffs, I think, since the last year, when our very beloved Elon Musk took over Twitter, and he started on a firing spree. I don't know what should I call it now, but nevertheless, he did that. So let us start by understanding this particular case first. Why did the layoffs start happening at Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, the best person to answer that question would be Elon Musk himself, right? What was going on in his head at the time he joined Twitter, and he started something that has led to the situation that we are in today, where more and more companies started to feel that the best way to manage the impending recession would be to start by doing mass layoffs. I think, firstly, I mean, before we dive into the reasons, let's just assess the gravity of the situation, right?
Sure, yeah.
I think since Elon Musk took over, there have been at least 150,000 to 200,000 layoffs just in the last 6 months within large tech companies. There might be more outside of large tech industry. Um, and that is somewhat unprecedented at a time when, generally, if you look at the financials of these companies, they are making record breaking profits, right? It is just the sense of impending doom because of the macro environment from an inflation standpoint, and also some of the turbulence that the companies in tech are going through because of the rapid automation and AI tech advancement that's happened. But apart from that, it's not like the Great Depression of 1930s or the Great Recession of 2008, when you could see that the fundamentals of the companies had weakened terribly and there was no other option for them to survive except to start doing mass layoffs. So the current situation and what Elon Musk started at Twitter was a proactive move, not a reactive move, which is fairly unprecedented from a layoff standpoint, I would say. The reasons for Twitter specifically, I think at least what Elon Musk had shared was the fact that he felt the company's team size was just artificially inflated because of historical hiring that they had done, and so there was a lot of fat that they could skinny down and become more efficient, cost effective, and a leaner company so that they could move faster with times and also just improve their overall cost structures, right? Um, I think those are very basic reasons, fundamental reasons that most companies give when they are doing mass layoffs, to survive recessionary environments, to kind of, uh, when they're changing their business strategy, so align their teams and their internal workforce with those business strategies. That's all there. But the way in which he did it, I think that is the most unique aspect of it, right? Which is letting go of half of the workforce on within the
Right.
first month, and it included some of the most senior people, at the company, and people who had been working there for over 10 years got an email.
It would have definitely shaken them off, right? I mean, doing it so rampantly.
Yeah, I mean, that is what is so unique and crazy about the current layoffs is the humanity aspect of it has completely taken a backseat, where your employees' loyalty, their skill sets, their personal lives are not given any consideration. And the only thing that is considered is the business objective. I mean, we are not naive here, right? Everybody understands that we are running a profitable business. So people need to be let go from time to time. But I think as business leaders, especially people who have so much visibility globally, and are inspiring millions of youth today on how they should be running large organizations, I think there is a strong onus on such business leaders to do things in the right way. Otherwise, they set a precedent which can really cause a lot of adversity down the line. That's just my personal opinion. I think it's debatable. A lot of people do believe what Elon Musk did was very hard, but a bold move, and it was right for the company. And it might be, but I don't think there has been anything to date that Twitter has achieved since
Right.
those layoffs that can point to saying that, yeah, that was the right move.
If I were to look at the current trend of layoffs in the tech sector, a lot of companies have been saying, and like you also said, that it is a proactive move. It is not reactive, and they anticipate a recession coming along very soon, and so they are trying to reduce costs by laying off people. However, if that were the case, it would have been across the board and not just tech companies. Uh, why is it that only the tech companies are facing this, and why is it that the layoffs are only happening across those companies? Any specific reason that?
Yeah, I think there are two core reasons in my perspective. There might be others. I think the number one reason is that, again, during the pandemic, there was a huge shift towards digital in every area of our life, right? Because when everybody was working remotely and leading lives from home, um, companies had to quickly deliver tech-enabled solutions, both at a larger scale as well as in new areas which were previously not, very, very common. Like, for
Hmm.
example,
Right.
collaboration tools, right? So, like tools like Notion, Asana, Monday, they had to ramp up very quickly during the pandemic. What that meant was growing not just the product portfolio, but also hiring a lot of people to support that growth that happened during those years. What they did not anticipate, perhaps, is after the pandemic period, what will happen to their business, right? So let's say a company like Asana that was growing, double digits during the pandemic for 2 years, they were growing like maybe 40, 50% of a high revenue base. That's not a small number. So they were hiring very, very aggressively. And so when the situation turned post-pandemic, they had to very quickly adapt to the new reality they were facing of sluggish demand again, right? So they had to let go of the excess of people that they had hired during those times. Now that's point one. The second point that I have generally seen in my career in consulting and now as a startup entrepreneur is that companies that are in tech space generally are the trailblazers or the bellwethers, as we like to call them, of hiring trends. So they usually lead new trends, while companies outside of tech usually lag in those trends and they follow suit, but perhaps after a certain period of time. Um, that could be the other reason where we are seeing the tech companies taking the most drastic measures um, rather than non-tech companies. So yeah, I think those are the two key reasons. Apart from that, I mean, I would say there are certain companies which are doing more layoffs than the others, and I think that's probably a reflection of their particular business environment. For example,
Yeah.
Meta and Amazon, they have done some of the largest layoffs in the history of layoffs.
Yeah, and you're right. I was actually coming to that point. Businesses like Meta, or for that reason Amazon, who have not been doing as well as they've done in the past. It makes sense for them to trim their man force, go on a layoff spree or whatever of that sort. However, companies like Microsoft or Apple, even those companies are laying off people, and uh, at the same, parallelly they're showing great profits on their books, delivering great results quarter on quarter. Are they just piggybacking the trend that is going on, or is there a deeper story here?
So, I mean, firstly, I thought Apple was the only large tech company that wasn't doing layoffs, but as you were speaking, I just did a quick Google search. I just wanted to be factually accurate. It seems like they are just laying off a
Very
very,
small
very small
percentage, but
number
yeah.
of people from their corporate retail. Yeah. Um, so now I think the companies like Microsoft and Apple, which are still showing record profits, and I mean, Microsoft has just acquired OpenAI, which is supposed to unlock a whole new realm of business segment for them, right? Like, I mean, having AI as a
It's like AI everywhere right now. I don't know.
yeah, and they are at the forefront of it, right? Which means they stand to gain probably the most out of any other large tech company, right? From AI's advancement, at least today. Um, I do feel, see, companies are taking advantage to some extent of the current layoff trend because it's easier to justify, a mass layoff at a time when the whole environment is weak and recessionary, as opposed to a time when the global environment or the macro environment is at its peak or booming, right? Um, I think it's kind of like you said, a little bit of piggybacking of the macro environment and taking a proactive measure to say, you know what, we wouldn't have been able to do it in a boom, but this is the right time to do it. So let's just see whatever we can do to optimize our cost structures, which may include slashing workforce. It may also include other things like, shutting down certain offices to save on real estate costs and other investments that may not have worked out for companies. Like, for example, I'm forgetting who told me this, but one of my friends of friends, they were working in some department of Google, which had 70 people, and it was kind of a new bet that Google had made on in a new technology or a new venture, and they gave them about like 2 years, and then they shut down the whole division overnight. So all those 60, 70 people were laid off overnight, right? Now, it could be because, of the recessionary environment, but it could also be because Google didn't see there was an ROI on that investment that they had made, right? So they didn't feel like continuing. So I think that it's a confluence of multiple factors. I think, and it can be attributed to the macro environment as well as what each company is experiencing in their own niche.
Right. Uh, let's turn to India, for a moment and bring the whole story closer home. Uh, I think we are at some level safeguarded by the recessionary effects or the what is happening in the inflationary effects in the US and globally as well. Uh, to an extent, I think we are not in the direct line of fire, and our economy is growing decently. There are still companies who are laying off people here as well, and in the tech sector. Or I don't think at least I've not heard apart from the tech sector, but at least in the tech sector they are. Again, is it also some kind of piggybacking, or is it also some kind of proactive approach to how the macroeconomic conditions would turn out?
I think it's a mix, but I would say it's not just piggybacking for sure. Because I mean, if you take a step back and look at the fundamentals of India's tech companies, majority of India's tech startups, at least, right? Like if you look at companies like Byju's or Meesho and all of these large tech companies, majority of the investment money that comes, so the funding that happens at these companies is by foreign investors, right? Um, and when foreign investors are going to be involved, in the board decisions and in the overall strategic decisions at the company, then it can't just operate as an Indian company. It has to operate as a global company, or at least have a global lens to doing business rather than just an Indian lens, right? And so I would say it is an imperative for these large tech companies in India to ensure that they are doing right by their shareholders, by their investors, and being cognizant of the macroeconomic environment and taking steps that would help them survive and come out stronger on the other side. Also, I mean, this is the most obvious thing that everybody knows why companies are doing layoffs and trying to contain costs is the funding environment, right? So the funding is down about 70% over last year, which is a massive, massive, like it's a precipitous decline, right? Um, and obviously, if you had inflated cost structures earlier where you were spending, let's say, $2 to acquire $1, right, in revenues, you can't do that anymore. You just cannot because there is no money to support that kind of, CAC, customer acquisition cost. And so you have to figure out how you're going to bring down your CAC to maybe $1 or below $1 so that you can become unit economic profitable, right? So I think it's not just piggybacking. I do feel there are fundamental changes in the business landscape and the macroeconomic environment within India as well, that are driving companies to take these kind of measures like layoffs, etc.
Which means there is a reason to worry for the people in the tech sector or otherwise as well, that the future might not be so secure, if I may say that.
I mean, depends on how you define the future. See, the most of these things are cyclical, right? What that means is they're temporary.
Right.
They're not permanent, right? And I think, yeah, just from that perspective, it's a basic thing. If you look at almost any chart of global or India stock market, there's a lot of short-term
Right.
volatility. But if you look at the longer time frames, it's usually trending upwards, right? So, I mean, if we just look at, let's say, 1 year or 2 years, yes, there's going to be a lot of volatility. I feel at least in 22 and 2023. Um, but I mean, if you look at the amount of innovation that's happening, the rapid tech
Yeah.
advancement that's happening, um, and generally where businesses are going in terms of their revenue growth and profitability, I think, all things point upwards. Yes, these current times are going to be harsh for companies which don't have disciplined business models and who don't have a strong, let's say, product market fit if they are early stage startups. It's going to be hard for those companies to survive. So it's kind of, the Darwinian theory. It's going to be the survival of the fittest. And after a few months, I think we'll see the biggest companies are going to continue to survive and thrive. And the smaller companies that will come out of this recession will be the ones which have very strong business models.
Great. Since you said, and I think you rightly said that a lot of these is cyclical. These are waves that come in and go out. Uh, how long do you anticipate this coming back to normal, or these fears going away? I know no one can say for certain, but what's your prediction on that?
Yeah, I'm not very good at, making such predictions. To be honest, I think, to be honest, is the thing that is kind of confusing for most people right now is how the Fed in US is trying to manage
Yeah.
inflation with high interest rates, right? And if you have high interest rates, obviously that means the cost of capital is high, which means there's not going to be as easy access of capital as it was,
Right.
let's say, 2 years ago in 2021. So until the interest rates come down or stabilize at least, it will be hard for companies to expect a boom or a very high growth environment. Um, but yeah, I mean, like for example, the interest rates in US for almost 2 decades were close to 1% or 2%, and right now they're almost five, six
Yeah.
times of that, right? Um, I don't think anybody is expecting them to go back to 1% or 2%, but people are wondering if they're going to stabilize or maybe come down to 3 or 4%, right? And I think when that happens, then we will slowly start to see the tide changing and businesses then getting more aggressive with their growth plans.
Right. And if we were to talk about India, because just last week we've seen that the central bank did not hike rates, which is probably a good sign. Uh, should we anticipate anything good very soon, or should we stick to our horses right now and wait for probably a few more months?
Yeah, I would say it's always prudent to kind of take things slow at a time like this, especially if you're a very large company. I think for a smaller company, the macro environment has slightly less impact, relatively speaking, because it really depends on your business, like I mentioned
Right.
earlier, right? So if you feel like your business requires a new loan or it requires new infusion of capital from investors, because you need to support the demand that you're seeing for your product or services, I don't think the macro environment should be stopping you. And I don't think most companies are, holding themselves back if they feel like they need to raise funds to support the high growth they are experiencing. I mean, there are a lot of other companies, though the larger companies, which are raising like, large rounds, sometimes even down rounds, because they need to survive today's times, and their cost structures have been so inflated for so long that the only way to survive is to infuse more capital in the company, right? So yeah, I mean, I would say there's no one size fits all for this particular question. You have to really assess based on the kind of business you're in, the phase you're in, um, and then yeah, make a judgment call based on that.
Right. I think layoffs instill a lot of fear. Just that word is drives a lot of fear in people, and rightly so. I mean, what you do and what you earn is what you are living by. To give our listeners a very practical and probably some advice on if they are laid off, what should be the plan of action? Because I think you're someone who's right at the center of helping people change their careers and so on and so forth. What would you advise at such a time?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I think the first thing to realize if and when you are laid off is the fact that it's not just about you. A lot of people who have never experienced a layoff and are not expecting to be
Hmm.
laid off would feel personal about that decision being made, right? They would take it personally. And usually, at least what we are seeing and the people we are working with, it's not that they were laid off because of solely their performance. It was because of the business requirements more than the
Right.
individual's performance, right? So what that means is things are out of your control to a certain extent in terms of being laid off, and and you need to really imbibe that and have that deeply entrenched inside of you before you start taking a move towards your next role, because you don't want to sabotage your confidence as you start to, let's say, apply for roles or interview with companies, because you want to position yourself confidently in front of your future employers. If you, let's say, I mean, I was just speaking with somebody who is an IIM Ahmedabad
Hmm.
graduate. He worked at Google and Amazon, 10 plus years experience, team leader, right? I mean, he checked all of the boxes and then some, got laid off by Amazon, right? His whole team got laid off by Amazon, and he we didn't really get into his mind space of what he
Hmm.
felt about the
Right.
layoff, but I could tell that he was not positioning himself in the strongest way that he should have. Like he was not talking about his experience as if he was a true team leader. He, I think, somewhere got impacted by this thought process or rationale that, hey, I just got laid off, right? So I think it's very important to maybe take some time to process things and understand that it's not really about you. It's really about the larger business, objectives and perhaps the macro environment. Once you have done that, right? Like it might take a day, it might take a week, it might take a month. Once you have done that, that's when you start or you get into an action mode of understanding what are the next best steps for you. And what it helps with is like you are not taking any knee-jerk
Right.
reactions, right? A lot of times people, when they are laid off, they're like, oh my God, I don't know how this happened to me. Let me just start applying for every single role I see on LinkedIn and Naukri or Angel List or whatever, right? And that's never something I would recommend to anybody, is taking that knee-jerk reaction and then, going on a spree of applying for every role is kind of the spray and pray. You might land a role, but it may not be the best long-term decision for you. So what to do, right? Once you have processed things is, firstly, do some self-reflection. Okay. Which doesn't mean you go to Himalayas and do some meditation and chanting. All it means is take some time to utilize certain frameworks that are out there to understand your priorities at this point in life, right? Maybe you're already very clear on your priorities. Maybe okay, I have bills to pay, and I have a family to support. So my number one priority is getting a new job as soon as possible, which helps me support my finances. Great, you have that clarity. Good, you will know what transition plan to execute on. But there are other people who don't have that clarity of, what are their priorities. Like, do you want to, for example, continue in the same field, even if you feel like that's not the right field for you, or the field does not have great future prospects, right? Um, so it's important to self-reflect and understand what kind of career options are the best fit for you going forward. It might be what you have been doing, it
Right.
might be something slightly different, right? Once you have done that, then I think you have the clarity of, okay, I'm going to target these one or two roles, and this is when I need to land a role by. Um, and then you come up with the strategy of whether you need to bridge any skill gaps, whether you should be networking, connecting with people for referrals, and then finally start applying for jobs by strengthening your profile and your resume, your LinkedIn, all those good things that people do
Right.
once they are ready to apply for jobs. So I think it's a fairly step-by-step process that we generally recommend to people, rather than taking a very ad hoc, scattered approach, or doing a knee-jerk reaction to their situation, which feels very, very personal, very drastic change in their lives, um, and very unprecedented. So it's hard. It's easier said than
Yeah.
done, what I'm saying, but I think it's important to process, take time to self-reflect, and then focus on your transition.
Lovely advice, I think, Arjun. You're right. It's very easy to take it on yourself and probably judge yourself, question yourself, your abilities in such a scenario. But like you said, it's probably not a true testament of what you are to what if you've been laid off as a reason of that. Uh, should you switch at this point? I mean, typically people would tell you stick to wherever you are. Don't switch. It'll be too risky. Would you still suggest to switch or not?
Yeah, I mean that's like such a kind of a black or white question. I don't think it's a black or white question. I think it's a very
Yeah,
gray area. Um, but yes, there are certain indicators that you can pay attention to, which may help you
right.
determine
Yeah,
whether a career
I think yeah,
transition
I
is
think that would be
right
a
for
better
you or not.
course to take. Yeah,
Yeah. I think, I actually just wrote about this on LinkedIn recently, where, what are some of those indicators that you should pay attention to? I mean, they're very basic, they are things that we feel and experience on a day-to-day basis, but it's just about how much we acknowledge them and process them, rather than just suppress them and just say like, that's okay. I'm an adult. I'm just gonna keep feeling miserable, and that's how life is, right? Um, so it depends on multiple factors. Firstly, do you feel like you have a good growth trajectory in your field and in your role, right? If you're starting to feel stagnating, and there is restriction on the amount of learning and development opportunities that you have within the company, and not just, I mean, a lot of times people may assess that over a period of months. I'm not saying just assess it within 2 3 months, but let's say over a year or 2 years, you have realized that you are really not learning that much more, and you're just working in the same exact role, and you're facing a ceiling in your career, then I think that's a very strong indicator that you should at least consider a career transition into a role which may be related to what you are doing. So, for example, if you're a traditional marketer, traditional meaning like you do like media buying, TV ads, ATL, those kind of things. Um, Maybe you want to think about digital marketing, right? It's not necessarily a completely different domain, but yes, it's the next step or the evolutionary step within marketing, right? So you start thinking about performance marketing, SEO, and like performance, product marketing, a lot of these things which are more associated within the tech
right.
space. And that's just one of the indicators, I would say. I think apart from that, if you feel constantly burnt out, and or you feel like your workplace is extremely toxic, which is not a good fit for you, then I think it's also a good time to think about transition. I mean, I wouldn't name industries because I don't want to color people's opinions about any specific industry, but there are industries where we, for example, at Pivot, get more users from, because they face more
Hmm.
burnout and they face more toxic environments in their roles, right? So I won't talk about that, but we have data proving
Hmm.
that that industry definitely has people trying to switch more from, because they can't survive for over a long period. So those kind of indicators are there as well. And I think the last one is, uh, more of a pull factor than a push factor, which is, have you been constantly thinking about a new role or a new idea which really seems to excite you and makes you want to try because you think you'll be good at it and you have great future prospects in it, right? I think people should definitely listen to that if that voice is coming from them, inside of them, on a long term basis.
Yeah,
Maybe once or
consistently,
twice
it's there.
it happens. Yeah, if it's happening consistently, that means you should not try and suppress it, because over a period of time, you will feel resentful about your current role. If you're not listening to your inner desires, and you don't have to completely give up on your current role. You can, start a side project. You can just take up a course. You can assess your affinity for that new role or the new field that you're aspiring towards, without just leaving your job abruptly. So that's one advice I would give, is that de-risk your transition, right? It doesn't have to be uh, just leaving your job overnight and starting something new without having any knowledge of what that new job entails. Yeah.
Great. I think lovely advice there, Arjun. A lot of good points, I think, for all our listeners to think upon, ponder upon, and take decisions wisely for themselves. And I think the last one, which you said, if there's a voice in your head which has consistently been troubling you or probably nagging you, you shouldn't quieten that down. You can probably look at it and explore that, in detail. Probably with a consultant or with someone who can whom you can bounce your thoughts with.
Yeah, or with pivot if you'd like.
Yeah, definitely. Great, thanks a lot, Arjun. I think that was a great discussion. A lot of points we discussed right across the board, and right from layoffs and how to probably transition careers as well. Thanks a lot for giving us time. I think it'll be really helpful for our listeners.
Absolutely, Shubham. Thanks so much for having me, and I really enjoyed the session.
Thanks, lovely. For all the listeners, if you have any questions, you can write to us. If you probably want to reach out to Arjun, you can reach out to him on LinkedIn. You want to check out Pivot, the link is in the details. Until next time, this is Shubham signing off. Bye bye.